Okay, here we are at The Uncommon Gift, chapters 11 and 12. The food set out in buffet style at the Miller's was spectacular and more than anyone would have expected, as it was catered by Mario's Restaurant, the premier Italian restaurant in town. It was clear that nothing was spared and that just about any kind of Italian food one might want was available. 6 kinds of pasta, with 4 kinds of sauces, specialty pizzas that most had never even seen before, but popular in Italy. Everyone had some of the best antipasto they had ever seen or enjoyed before. There were 6 makes of wines available, from rosés to burgundies, from 3 different kinds of vineyards from Italy. But it was a bit much, but you could tell that the Millers knew how to throw a party. There were even 4 kinds of lasagna with chicken, beef, pork, and a special sausage that was absolutely marvelous. It was often hard for their guests to choose what to enjoy. So many chose to take a little bit of each and sample all that was there. Various styles of salads were also available. Bobby and Diane, being young, even chose to be somewhat adventurous and try something outside their comfort zone, and were glad they did. They were beginning to see the kind of food successful people might enjoy on a daily basis. A great dinner was had by all. Before everyone got too comfortable and might have been thinking more about taking a nap than music, Cassandra announced the performance schedule for the evening. Everyone knew they were in for a musical treat. Mark was going to be first up and taking the lead in the first movement of Mozart's Clarinet Concerto K622. The 2 violinists and the cellist were to take part for the strings that were usually reserved for a small chamber ensemble. No change was made in Mark's lead part, but the string players worked out how they would support his effort. It was an amazing performance, and everyone gave Mark a standing ovation for his stellar playing. Next up as a surprise was Cassandra on the flute, and she had created an original composition for flute and cello. She had sent an email and an attachment of the cello part for Robert Johnson prior to this evening so he could get comfortable participating, as if he needed it, as he was the best cellist in the symphony. Everyone was amazed that Cassandra seemed to not miss a beat in her performance since leaving the symphony nearly 4 years ago. It was an amazing performance again and a great original composition. It was so well received by all that she thought about expanding upon it and possibly making it what she might perform at the university one Saturday night in the future. Mr. Johnson had said that he would love to perform the extended version with her if she chose to do that. The final performance included the symphony's pianist, Margaret Olson, the violinist and cellist in a piece of Beethoven, as it was a piece that was deemed to be lost but only discovered recently in Germany. It was called the Lost Beethoven Piano Trio. The violins broke up the part into 2 sections, the first part played by Nancy Stanton and the second half by Brenda Dixon. The Millers had a beautiful Steinway Model B, a 7-foot grand piano, generally used for ensemble work, and was perfect for the evening. Again, another great performance, which when completed, brought about a much discussion about how it was discovered. It also expanded the discussion about how many other works by the greatest composers in classical music that might have been lost over time. There are one other mysteries that no one will ever know, how many of these hands that are in the hands of collectors rather than in the composer's archives. Once the concerts were over, many headed back into the dining hall and have a bit more of the spectacular food that was left. Many took seats at the tables again and continued their conversations of the performances and the lost Beethoven work. Cassandra took time to introduce Bobby and Diane to all of the symphony members, who all urged them to keep working hard as they came up through the ranks just like they were doing now. They all invited them to a symphony performance and an opportunity to come to a practice session that Cassandra would arrange for them, and she agreed to do so. While the adults continued to have their food and discussions, Bobby and Diane asked Mark to take them back into Charles' office and let them hear some more music on the great stereo. The three of them excused themselves and headed out. Bobby and Diane took seats on the love seat and told Mark to play anything he wanted. He surprised them and played an LP of a Beatles release, Rubber Soul. They were all sure they had never heard it sound like that ever. What an experience. Mark continued to play DJ for them and pulled out some Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Dave Brubeck, and then some Dixieland band music featuring Pete Fountain on clarinet, a most prominent figure in New Orleans jazz, and then closed with a Peggy Lee LP. They had all agreed that they had never heard any recorded music sound so real ever. It was a night they would never forget. Once the evening began to break up, Charles and Cassandra thanked the Masons and Diane for coming and hinted that there would be more opportunities like this coming up for everyone. They thanked the Millers again for the surprise invite and expressed what a wonderful time they all had. They said their goodbyes and said goodnight to Mr. Johnson, the doorman. He remarked how great the food was as he was invited into the kitchen and had his fill of some of the wonderfully good food as well. He said, "Nor doorman ever ate this well," he laughed, and they all said their goodnights. Chapter 12. Bobby and Diane were really amazed at how much fun they had just being with a room full of adults. They also realized how much work they had to do musically to even begin to get as good as those symphony members were, or even Mark for that matter. Bobby was still in awe of the Miller's house and wondered what someone had to do to be able to live in a house like that. He could only dream of a house like that. Once home, he walked Diane to the door and said he would see her at church in the morning. She said her goodbyes as well. Once Bobby was inside his house, he said goodnight to his parents and headed upstairs to a room. He hit the bathroom, brushed his teeth, and then put on his PJs and hopped into bed. He had left his stereo on, the university radio station, and realized that his stereo still sounded pretty good, but nothing like what Mr. Miller had in his study. He wondered just how successful did one have to be to own a house like that again. It had to be crazy money for sure. He then felt very sorry for the Millers losing their son David on some ski trip that went bad. He had no idea how sad they had to have been, and even more sorry it took them a long time to even try and get their lives somewhere back to normal, if one ever could. Parents outliving their children was not supposed to happen. On his stereo was some classical piano music, and he slowly fell asleep with it playing quietly in the background. He was surprised that he was even enjoying this type of music that most 13-year-olds would never even choose to listen to at all. Certainly no one at school he knew, other than Diane possibly. He thought that tomorrow he would ask his dad if he could look through his LP collection for some classical music his dad would let him take him upstairs to listen to. His dad had an older ARXA turntable that looked pretty old school compared to Bobby's Dual 1219. He knew that it sure sounded good though, so looks weren't everything in audio. His dad owned a pair of old AR-3A speakers that sounded way better than Bobby's, but not as much as he would have thought. His dad liked jazz and great American songbook performances by soloists. His mom, as most women do, liked show tunes. He tried to relax after all the fun they had tonight, and the thoughts of all that excitement kept running through his head. What a night it had been. He slowly fell fast asleep. In the morning he woke to the sound of his parents in the kitchen, and the smell of pancakes floated up the stairs. He quickly took a shower and got dressed and headed downstairs. His mom saw him come into the kitchen. "Well, look at you, mister, all dressed up in a tie," said Mom. "Bill, look at this, will you?" she added. "Did all those dressed-up people from last night motivate you to wear a tie to church today?" asked Dad. "You are looking very sharp," he added. "Well, I have a couple of ties, and just thought I might try one out today," added Bobby. "It doesn't hurt to look your best for church," he said. "Well, I'm going to have to keep up with you," said Dad. "I'll put on a tie as well so as not to seem underdressed," he said with a big smile. With that, they all dug into the stack of pancakes Mom had made, as they were still steaming hot on a serving plate. Mom liked peanut butter on hers, but the boys just liked butter and maple syrup. Mom poured some OJ into Bobby's glass, and Dad got up and poured some hot coffee into his cup and topped off Mom's cup as well. "Well, what did you think of the Miller's home?" asked Mom. "I didn't think anyone we knew could live in a house like that," stated Bobby matter-of-factly. "I guess the Miller's family has a very successful business," he added. "Did you know Charles' father started their business?" asked Bobby. "I don't know," said Dad. "I will make a point to ask Charles the next time we see him." They finished their breakfast, rinsed their plates in the kitchen sink, and put them in the dishwasher to help Mom out. Mom washed the griddle in the sink and put it away, and she put all of the silverware into the dishwasher. Mom went into the downstairs bathroom to check her makeup, and then they all went out to the car and headed off to church. The Davis family had just left a minute or so before they did, as they could see the back of their Buick headed down Smith Street. Dad put Bobby's first cassette recording attempt into the car tape player, and they all had a listen. "Not too bad, son," said Dad. "You are really making some fine progress on your clarinet," he added. "Thanks, Dad," said Bobby. "Just not quite as good as what we heard Mark play last night, though," he added with a laugh. "That's okay," said Dad. "You will get there if you keep practicing like you have been," Mom added. "We are really proud of you, you know." "Thanks, Mom," added Bobby. "It's sure been a lot of fun so far." For some reason today, Bobby took more notice of the church building as they pulled up as he had in the past, and noticed what a beautiful building it was. It was built in 1875, and the stones that made up the exterior were a light tan with chiseled facets to the face of them, rather than just smooth like so many. The doors to the front entrance of the church were custom made, and each was 50 inches wide for each door left and right. They were very heavy doors that when Bobby was younger had a very time opening on his own. They opened into a very large foyer, 30 feet wide and 15 feet deep, and to the right was a sanctuary entrance, again with double swinging doors that were only 36 inches wide, left and right. To the left was a fellowship hall that was so large it could seat about 200 guests for dinner or for a meeting of some sort. They had many 6-foot-long foldable leg tables with the usual metal folding chairs that were black in color. There was a full kitchen in the back with two large 6-burner stoves that were used for special events including weddings and other receptions. Above that room there were stairs to the right that went up to the smaller rooms that were used for classrooms for Sunday school and for Vacation Bible School during the summer. There was a separate door under the second floor stairs that led to the basement that housed the boiler room for heating the large system that started out being coal-fired and then was converted to natural gas later on. It was all replaced in the 1950s with a much smaller and more efficient model that took up less than one-fourth of the space. The church had a full-time custodian to take care of the heating system and general maintenance and cleaning for such an old building. The sanctuary was beautiful with dark walnut pews and a semicircle in front of the large pulpit area that was about 50 feet wide and 7 feet deep. The pulpit itself was a massive wooden structure with stunning carvings across the front. It was about 5 feet wide at the base. The carpet in the room was all dark maroon with matching color seat cushions on all the pews. There was a full balcony above the main seating and went all the way around the top of the sanctuary. That was also usually full for the main 11 o'clock service. Across the back of the stage were two alcoves. One on the left contained a baptismal, but was usually covered with wood sections so it could be walked upon when not in use. The one on the right jutted out a little bit more into the sanctuary and was home to a 9-foot Steinway Model D concert grand piano. The church had a part-time pianist for the Sunday services and that also performed the role as a choir director. Choir practice was Wednesday nights after service. In the center of the rear of the stage was a full-stop magnificent pipe organ that sounded beautiful, as the church had a full-time organist, as just not anyone could play it. Around the back of the sanctuary and the sides were the most beautiful stained glass windows that any church in town had. Bobby had noticed them from the first time he actually attended church in the sanctuary. His grandmother had been the church secretary forever, it seemed, and he would come help her on Saturdays, run off the bulletins on a mimeograph machine, and he got the one to be able to run the crank, as it was a fully manual operator. His grandmother was also a trained bookkeeper, so she was also the church financial officer and took care of all of the church accounts, payroll, and bank deposits that were dropped in the night depository at the old Second National Bank on the way home from church. After attending the concert at Schwartz Auditorium at Cornell University, Bobby seemed to notice more about the church that he has always attended. He had taken it for granted too long. His grandmother had passed away 2 years after his grandfather. The Masons had another nice day at church, and Dan took them out to eat at a smaller restaurant in town that had a Sunday buffet, and everyone had a nice selection of various meats, potatoes, vegetables, and salads. What Bobby liked most was the huge dessert selection they had, from pies, cakes, cookies, and puddings. His favorite was tapioca pudding. He had meatloaf, corn, and some mashed potatoes with lots of butter for his main course. He cleaned his plate very well and was quite full when they left, but he never did forget about the tapioca pudding. Once they arrived home, Bobby's mom took